Hey there, and welcome to the Planner Pals podcast, a podcast hosted by two true Planner Pals. My name is Mark, or Mark Your Pages.
And I am Jess, or Jessie Corinne. And in today's episode, we're going to be having a look at the opposite from last time's episode. So rather than the trackers that we can't live without, the ones that we set up time and time again because they work so well for us, we're looking at the ones that definitely don't. The ones that we have tried maybe a couple of times, but every single time it flops.
Yeah, and I'm glad to be back home in my own space now. Thank you for everyone who put up, especially you, Jess, with that last setup, because everything about that, it was like, let's try to make a remote podcast from far away. No, let's not do that ever again. So thanks everyone for listening and also commenting on that one and sharing what's worked out well for you too. It's always so cool to hear some different and cool ideas.
Yeah, I always appreciate when, something that might be essential for us, somebody turns around and goes like, yeah, no, I cannot use that layout at all whatsoever. People who are saying like, oh yeah, my future log is my essential or my index is essential. And then I turn around like, no. So it's nice to get the kind of like different perspectives, both from like us and then also from our community as well.
Absolutely. And I think the ones we're going to talk about today, all these fails, I think everybody can relate to as well. It's really hard just to pick out a few. I think, what have I been bullet journaling now for over 7 years, I guess now. So there's a whole lot of fails.
Yeah. Oh gosh. I think that if I just took up like all of the layouts that have not worked out, the ones that did not get executed the way that I had hoped, I could probably fill like 3 full notebooks with them, which is certainly saying something, especially when people feel like they have to approach their journaling kind of like perfectly and every layout has to be a winner and everything has to get completely used, otherwise you're doing it wrong. Certainly not the case. Failed layouts definitely happen, even for people who have been doing this for quite a while.
Oh, yeah. No idea is a bad idea until it just doesn't execute well. I was actually thinking about maybe doing like a future video on YouTube where I go back to like the really bad spreads and things that didn't work out and be like, how would I approach this today knowing what I know? So maybe we'll get some other ideas from this too. And maybe others can definitely share the ones that they've commonly failed on as well.
Yeah, I think that'd be an actual really cool idea. It's like, this didn't work for me before, but like, how would I approach it differently? Because I've done that previously with like recreating your first layout or setup or whatever, and just making it a little bit better or whatnot. But to actually think about tackling failed layouts and kind of going back and reworking them, rejigging them with kind of more context on what does or doesn't work with you could actually be a really good idea. I need to write this down.
I mean, we just totally brainstorm if we think there's something you can do to make it better, or even if there's things that we've learned over time. Like you said, if you started this on like one of your first ones, honestly, most of mine I've just never done again, or I do them very sparingly because I just know it's not for me. Is there anything that like in your list, as we go through it, obviously you'll share more about it, but are there ones on there where you're like, this just hasn't worked for me for years, never going to do this?
When I was trying to brainstorm the list and go through like, what kind of layouts have I had that don't really work? Are there any that like I tried once and just kind of quit? I'm not really a quitter when it comes to that. I'm kind of maybe like a little bit delulu. Like I just like keep trying and trying again. It's like, yep, still doesn't work. I don't know why we put this in here for the 4th year in a row. Do you usually have just kind of like tried once, flopped, doesn't try again, or is it more like a tried a couple of times and still isn't working?
I've tried a couple of times and they just don't work. Like my very first one, we can just kick into it if you're ready to go, is just any type of water tracker ever. Like I know that people live and breathe and drink by H2O trackers. It's one of the most common things I feel like I saw when I started first bullet journaling, but it is just something about it that I'm not drinking. I would need a certain size cup that's like, Mark, this is an 8-ounce cup. And every time I drank that, I would know that is 1 cup. I just honestly, Jess, I just don't like to do the math, I think is really what it comes down to. So I can't track properly because I don't know the proper size of my cup, honestly.
Yeah, I think that's also kind of a good point about it though. Like unless you're using a very kind of standardized vessel, I suppose, for your water intake, how do you actually know how much water you are intaking? Or are we only including water? Are we including other beverages? Because, water in the form of water, as I call it, isn't the only way to get water into your diet as well. Like you get it through food, You get it through coffee. Yes, I know there's a diuretic effect. Again, I don't drink coffee. I only take it in the form of ice cream. But like if you melt it, that's practically water, right?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. I mean, I think it's really just, I don't like to do the math. Like this that I have here is 18 ounces, right? So in my brain, I've always been told, what is it like? You're supposed to drink what, 6, 8 ounce glasses of water or 8 cups of water a day. And that's what I think I get confused on. What is the measurement that we're really using? And I think that's just kind of the big part about it. I mean, I've always looked at it from a standpoint of actual water, not kind of soda or coffee or anything else. Like the water is the thing, because I feel like that's always the goal. The goal is always less soda, more water, because it's the healthier thing to do. But I think the other thing about it too, and the reason I don't ever come back to this as well, is a few years ago, a friend of mine told me that water intake is supposed to be based off of like a lot of other factors, like your age and your weight and like a bunch of other things. So, the 8 glasses of water a day is like a standard thing, but I might actually need more or less. And again, I'm just not going to do the research to figure it out. I'll just drink water without tracking it every single day. And putting that in my bullet journal is just taking up space. And I've definitely come across and have a lot of different interesting ways that I've tried to include it. And if you're watching this on YouTube, also, we'll put all of these up so you can see what they look like. Sorry for the podcast fans out there that listen in the true audio form. But I've done everything from actual little water drops. I've done squares in my boxes that I can fill in and color in as I go along. I've tried a lot of different things and just honestly just never keep up with it.
Yeah. Do you find that, I mean, for the ones that you've tried previously, have you done both weekly and monthly, or just weekly, just monthly?
I've only ever done weekly. See monthly for me, like that's just not I just wouldn't fill it out.
No, that's fair. I find that tracking things on a monthly basis can be kind of tricky. Like anytime I have a month-long tracker, we get to the mid-month point and my motivation is just shot, and then the rest of the month is like, obviously I died.
Most of the time, Mondays work out. Tuesdays, I'm all right. And by the time I get to Wednesday, I'm like, who cares, Mark? You're drinking water. Good for you. You made a good choice today.
You made a good choice today. Always good. Yeah, a little gold star on that one. I find that with water trackers, because I have used them previously, I love the aesthetic of them. I love the little water drop or the little glass or like anything like that. I think it's really cute to kind of fill in. But just like you said, I'd get to about the midweek point and just be like, flop. Also, I tend not to take my water in the form of water, and I don't really want to fill it in with Coke Zero, even though that's the most accurate as to what I actually drank.
I guess you'd have to find out how much water is actually in a Coke Zero, distill it down. It'd be a whole science experiment.
I'm for it. I'm all about it. I'm not going to go to the effort, but if I could be bothered, I would be bothered. I mean, that's kind of goes without saying. But I think that, like you said, that point about just because, the kind of stock standard, universal truth is 8 standard glasses or whatever. Yeah, completely differs from person to person. I haven't done the research. I am not a doctor, but, weight, age, like location that you live in. Like if you live in somewhere that's particular dry or arid or like whatever, that's going to have an impact on it. If it's summer versus if it's winter. I mean, if we were going with like the most accurate quote way to track your hydration levels without risking like TMI, too much information kind of here, but like probably it would be a pee tracker and you might want to color code it or something. I'm not going to put that in my planner. Like I don't need that information, but for somebody who does, maybe that's the way that they want to go about it.
What color would we color code the pee tracker, I wonder?
Hopefully only the good range of yellow colors and not into anything escandalo.
Whoa, why is that a sunset orange?
I'm also thinking that like if you drink black vodka, your pee straight goes green, like very green. So maybe we need to put that in there as well if you're a black vodka drinker. But if you're not, then hopefully it's just in the range of yellows.
Wishing the best. We are not doctors.
Not doctors, right? There's no medical advice in this, only journaling advice. Possibly, if a water tracker isn't for you, but you want to track your hydration, maybe you need a pee tracker.
All right, Jess, so what is one of your most failed collection pages?
I think one that would definitely have to be up there would be a routines tracker, because despite wanting to have really good routines and, completely habitualize my life in a way, I'm not very good at it, and thus I'm not very good at sticking with the tracker. It's very much one of those kind of like cumulative correlative causation kind of things. I don't do the routine, so then I don't want to go back to the tracker, and then because I don't go back to the tracker, it hasn't been filled in, and then I don't want to use the tracker because it's half empty, and so on and so forth. Very kind of cyclic thing. But the way that this kind of tracker would typically work, the way that I've set it up previously, is that I outline a bunch of stuff that I want to do on, say, like a weekly or bi-weekly, fortnightly kind of basis, maybe even a monthly basis. I have a list of those running down one side of the page, and then along the top of the page, I'll have the week numbers. Normally, I'd only set this one up so it would be like half year based, possibly like quarterly based, so that I don't have to have like a absolutely jumbo sized journal to fit like every week of the year across the top. That'd be a little bit ridiculous. But going in and filling that one in, I would just go and check off for each of the rows and columns, like which ones did I do on which week. In theory, it didn't actually do that, didn't fill it in, and thus it was kind of useless. I tried it a couple of times, but despite the good intentions, could not get it to actually work.
What kind of routines are you putting on there? I'm very curious about this.
Yeah, so most of them would be around kind of like life admin and journaling related processes. So things related to kind of like a weekly reset process, like have you tidied up your office? Have you gone and populated your calendar for the next week? Have you filled in all of your yearly collections that you're neglecting and that kind of stuff? It would also have things related to household work, chores, which I'm notoriously bad at. So again, don't do them, don't fill it in, doesn't look nice because I haven't filled it in, don't use it.
I think it's also the avoidance part of it. It's just because you know that you don't want to look at it, especially if you don't like to do it. And it's just like that constant reminder, at least with the chores and things like that. The routines, though, for some of the other pieces, I was really interested last time when you were talking about the different journals that you have and what you keep in there. And I actually asked you, like, how do you remind yourself to go back and do that? I mean, I think that that's probably a really good way to potentially do that. But in my mind, when I think routines, I think about like my morning routine. And we talked about this last time where, like, for me personally, that executive function part is okay in my brain. So I don't need to track whether or not I've washed my face and brushed my teeth and flossed and got dressed or those type of things. Like, that's just happens. Sometimes, honestly, it feels like Westworld in this house where, like, every day I wake up and it's the same exact thing every day. And I was just like, nothing's changed. Somebody come and do something interesting. You know, like, it's just the same thing every single day. So to track that, for me personally, kind of feels like mundane. But for those people who struggle with that part of it, I can understand how that could potentially work. Or again, some people maybe get a little dopamine hit, you know, when they circle in that, yes, they brush their teeth for the day and everything's going great. And I'm all about that. I just think for me, I'd be in the same boat where I'd be like, you know, just not filling that out because I did it. Like, I'm okay.
Yeah, I think that some of those routines and practices, they kind of do happen a little bit on autopilot. They're the ones that happen on a weekly basis because they always happen at the set same time. Like, for instance, laundry day is Thursday. That is the way it is. That is the way it will be until Vogel says he wants Thursday, which won't happen because he's usually at work on Thursday. So stuff like that, not so bad. It's just the things like actually going in and like cleaning the bathrooms and changing the sheets and all of those kind of things that if I'm not mindful about them, they will not happen. I have to actually actively remind myself to do them. And I always felt kind of bad going through and like flipping through my journal because, you know, sharing them on the internet and whatever. And we get to that routines layout and it says like change sheets, hasn't happened for 8 weeks. And I'm like, I promise it has. I'm just not using the layout. Oh my gosh. Like, I'm not sitting there in bed swimming in my own filth, I promise. But it doesn't look like it.
And you know someone would call you out on that. One of your like hardcores that are like watching every video where they're like, oh my gosh, Jess did not fill in her circle. That's disgusting.
Well, yeah, like during lockdown and stuff, because my trigger to brush my teeth was leaving the house, and I wasn't leaving the house, there were a couple of days on my tracker that I hadn't filled in that I brushed my teeth. And some person, I don't know, somebody who was obviously having a hard time of it was commenting, being like, oh, it's disgusting, you like didn't brush your teeth every day. I'm like, congratulations on being perfect. And it's like, I'm very hopeful that one day the routines tracker, as I've set it up, will work for me. But like you kind of talked about at the start, I would like to maybe go back to that layout and think about like, how could I change this so that it actually does work for me? Because I think that the information I'm capturing there could be useful to like keep track of and have.
Definitely. I think, especially with some of the more like administrative ones that you talked about, I could definitely see setting a reminder for that, whether you're doing that if you're bullet journaling in a future log, or I could see even like a calendar page or something like that where you just go through it. I would probably use like those dot markers maybe, and just like, every Thursday I'm just dotting down and writing laundry just as a reminder, like this is happening, make sure it gets done. I could see that for things like bills, for instance, or if you were doing something else where like it's not an executive function of like a daily kind of thing you do, whatever it might be, but just, I don't know, the more administrative thing I think is where I'm going with it. Like that is a good reminder. And if I'm not doing it there, I would also probably have it in my phone as well. Just a reoccurring meeting every single week. Like, don't forget, just like what I do with trash and recycling. Like, I know that happens on Monday and Fridays and every other Tuesday, but I constantly, well, I use my phone all the time. I just set it up in there and it reminds me, and I know, because otherwise it's just not happening.
Yeah, I think that maybe it's not necessarily something that I need to put on a tracker per se, but some kind of reminder somewhere else could be useful just to make sure that those things happen. But that's one of mine. What is your next underused, often failed layout that you put in your journal? Or maybe not so much anymore.
This is one we talked about a little bit last time. We were joking about it. So it was actually a little bit of a precursor for this conversation. It's my cocky social media trackers where I make my number too big. So if you didn't check out the last episode, I talked about a social media tracker, which I do love to use. It's a very highly used tracker. However, one time I got too big for my britches and I decided that I was going to start tracking my followers by every 1,000, which was a cocky endeavor. And therefore, I only ever filled in one box and never filled in any other boxes on that spread. So something that I've done is I kind of scale depending on how growth is happening. Early on, I was tracking by every 25 new followers. And then for a while, I think I upped it to 100. And then, I don't know, for whatever reason, I went from 100 to 1,000. And then I was like, oh, no, let's dial it back. So I think now I do it by 100, because honestly, I don't know about you, 100 new followers at this point for me doesn't happen. I actually go down, I feel like, more than I go up nowadays. So it's one that I definitely love. It's just that I have to watch my values so that I actually can use it. And it's not just sitting there blank and sad.
I think that's a really good point, though, too, because like you said in the last episode, that is one of your essential layouts. It's one that you do like to use time and time again, but there's a version of it that doesn't work. That cocky, maybe a little bit ambitious kind of style, or maybe that gap is just a little bit too big to really warrant having as many boxes on there as you had.
Yeah, it was definitely a fun one too, and I'm gonna go back to it. I liked the design of it. It worked well for me, and I feel like it was a missed opportunity of a really great collection page that would have looked very cool all the way filled out. So maybe my next one, after, if I ever fill out this new one, I'll go back to it and reuse it just to bring it back to life.
That's always such a bummer, is like the ones that you spend a lot of time, effort, energy setting up, and they look really good, and you're like, oh, I'm feeling super anxious to get into this, I'm gonna use it up and all of this, and then for whatever reason it doesn't happen. It is always such a bummer when the ones you've spent effort on are the ones that go unused. I hate that.
It does. It feels like, yeah, a lot of effort that just went into nothing. And you're just kind of like, well, I'm never doing this again. And then you get to your next tracker and you're like, actually, no, this was super fun. I'm going to do something really cool or crazy with it.
Yeah, I'm trying to think if there are any layouts that I've had like that where, like, specifically I remember spending a lot of time and attention with it and it just didn't really pan out. I'll have to go back through the archive. Can't think of one right now. I'm sure there is one, though.
Well, let's go into your next one. What's another failed tracker or collection page that just hasn't quite cut the mustard for you?
It took me such a long time to learn to stop setting this one up because there were just so many failed attempts, and that was a weight tracker. Trying to, maintain a healthy weight, get it to a healthier spot, all of that kind of thing. And you'd always start off with a lot of motivation, like, I'm going to do this, I'm going to shed the weight, rah, rah. And then the 1 week that it goes up, you're like, well, stuff this, I'm out of here, table flip, boo hiss. So many failed attempts at this one. I have given it up, at least for now. I'll probably go back to it. I can never learn my lesson, really. But yeah, I had it in at least 4 of my previous journals. One of them I actually just ended up taping the pages together because it was so demotivating. Because one of the things that I used to do was like, okay, if the goal to lose X amount of weight goes across this many weeks, then this is the kind of like ideal trend line going from higher weight to lower weight. And as soon as my line started tending against the grain of that, well off the cliff of motivation, fire. I would like to possibly bring it back at some stage. Again, me not being able to learn my lesson. But I think that I just need to approach it differently because I think that the ways that I've set it up previously didn't really lean into realism. Maybe it was just like way more kind of idealistic and optimistic the way that I approached it. And I do think that having the data could be beneficial, but it's just not something that I'm able to work with right now. At the moment, instead, I'm just tracking it via an app on my phone because it's not like so front and center. It means that I don't necessarily kind of focus on the number quite as much, I suppose, but I still have that data there to, take to the doctor and look at my progress and all of that kind of stuff.
I know exactly what you mean by this. So I just started my workout journal. I'm going to have a video coming up for it shortly. And I know exactly what you meant about that motivation. So it was like the very first week. So, I'll be super open and transparent because that's just me. So I started this off at 250 pounds, right? And I was like, okay, Mark, like this is the most I've ever weighed. Like, okay, hell of a starting point. And so I do my tracker at the beginning of every week because that's when I have to do a check-in with my coach, right? And so the first week was 250. And then week 2, I was down to 242. And I was like, hell yeah, holy crap. Like, that's incredible. I was like, I'm just going to keep losing this weight. This is great. And then this week I did it and it stayed at 242. And I was like, okay. I think a big thing for me though, too, is like mentally using this in conjunction with other things, right? And I definitely can realize, look, I was able to lose 8 pounds. Did I do that math correctly? Yes. Because I cut out, all the extra soda, just like not paying attention to what I was eating. There's probably a lot of things. It definitely wasn't just working out because it was a week worth of working out. So it was whatever. But going into this upcoming week, and I just, in my brain, I thought, oh, well, you've been doing a really good job with like cutting down your calories. You've been doing a great job with your workouts. I just expected it. But then I was just like, it's okay. And I think it's because right now in my mind, I know that I'm also working out 4 days a week. I know that I'm watching what I'm eating. And I think I don't know, mentally for some reason right now it makes sense and I'm okay with it. But I know that if I get into next week and it is at the same exact weight, like that's too much of a plateau this early on. You know what I'm saying?
I know exactly what you're saying. And I think it's hard because we're rational people. Like, we know that it's not just going to tend downwards. Like, some days, if you're doing a daily weigh in, which probably you're not, you're doing weekly, but, some days, some weeks it's going to go up. Some days, some weeks it's going to be the same. And some days, some weeks it's going to go down, which, depending on your goal, one of those is good. But you know that it's not going to be consistent the whole way through. Yet as soon as you get that data point that goes against what you want, it still feels like a kick in the teeth.
Oh, it totally does. And I'm looking at all of this, and there's a lot of data that I'm going through too, like calories, steps, workout time, all of these things. I think also too, in my mind, I was like, Mark, you're also building muscle, and muscle weighs more than fat. That's why it's not changing. I don't know if that's true after 3 weeks of doing this workout. I don't think I'm like doing anything crazy, but I know exactly what you mean. But I think it has to be a mindset. But one thing I do like about these two, and these actually probably could go for every single one of the trackers that we talk about, these can be like point in time trackers of something that you want to pay attention to, right? Like if you're really concerned about how much water you're drinking throughout the week and you want to do that for a week just to track it, I think that's totally cool. And then drop it and never use it again, right? Or if you want to do something like a weight tracker because it's something that you're thinking of or maybe do for a few weeks, I think there's like really fun ways to add it into your weekly as something to do. I think it's just when you do it every week or you set up a monthly one or a yearly or whatever, it just feels very overwhelming. I kind of like to pick and choose my trackers off of a little shelf in my brain where I'm like, oh, this week I want to pay attention to the songs I listen to the most, or I want to pay attention to, how many new followers I have, but do it in small chunks so that maybe it's a safety mechanism. I don't see it do this too much, like go up and down too much. It's like, oh, there's only a positive line, up or down, whatever you're trying to track. I just don't want to see the long term because that means I have to be accountable and, I don't want to do that.
I think that's also a good point. Like, if you want to incorporate these kind of trackers into your layouts or logs or whatnot, and you're not too sure if they're going to work out for you, do what we call an ooch, right? Like a little small kind of like test run type deal. So rather than setting it up for the month, set it up for the week. Rather than setting it up for a half year, set it up for a month. See if it works for you. And then if it does, maybe we can incorporate it into those kind of like start of journal setups once you kind of get a feel for it. Because every time I would do the weight tracker, I suppose it would be on like a half year annual kind of basis. Maybe if I try and do it just across like a 4-week period, maybe I'll have a little bit more motivation to get it done. I guess it really kind of came back to the range of data I wanted to collect there. Like I wanted to see it over a longer period of time. That's why I would set it up for a longer period of time. But if I'm making those smaller ones, who's not to say that I can't just go back at the end of the journal and like make a layout at the end to kind of pull all that data together if I actually bothered to collect it.
Yeah, and you've mentioned it before, making sure that this is actual important data and useful data that you're doing, not just performative. That's probably the other part of this too, right? If you're just doing a water tracker or a weight tracker for the standpoint of having an aesthetic looking weekly, you have no skin in the game, really, right? You're just like, oh, I'm going to go ahead and fill this out and it looks very cool or whatever else. But if you're not really using it, or using it, like you said, taking this data to your doctor or using it for a specific workout plan or whatever that might be, you also just don't really have anything really to do with it. So it's easier, I think, to just forget about it and not use it anymore because it didn't really matter at the end of the day, perhaps.
Yeah, I think it's also thinking about like the metric versus the goal. So it's like if the thing that we're actually recording and keeping track of and all of that is the weight, yeah, then that in turn kind of becomes the goal, even though it might not necessarily be the goal. Like the goal could be to, I don't know, have more energy and just like, eat a wider range of nutritious foods and all of that kind of stuff. And it's like if you're not keeping track of those things, but you're keeping track of weight instead, then you just kind of slip into a point where the weight becomes the main focus rather than the other things that you're trying to do. But
Oh, I really like that, Jess. That's actually a really fantastic point. Because I mean, even from my own perspective, like even though that for this week has plateaued, I feel completely different. Like I feel better about it. And that's such a good thing to think about. I think a lot of like coaches, and I've heard it before in like the health profession too, especially around weight, is like not paying attention to the number, but paying attention to your body. Like as you are doing those things, like you just mentioned, how do you feel? That number, while to a certain extent might be a goal that you're trying to hit, but it's really about how your body feels instead. But it's kind of hard to track that though, but unless you have like a happiness tracker, energy tracker. I mean, you could do more with it, perhaps. And there's a lot of journals that have those icons in it and how you're feeling and things like that. But maybe something different to add if you have tried it before. Here we go, like brainstorming, like, how do we make this better? It's like, yeah, you could track your weight for all of these weeks, but maybe you also track, like, how are you feeling? How much energy do you have? So even if the number does go up a little bit or down or plateaus, you know that your body feels better about it. Maybe that's a good positive spin you could put in your brain a little bit.
yeah, I mean, it's the same idea with the water tracker, right? The goal isn't necessarily get your 8 cups. The goal is to be hydrated. So while getting the cups is how you get to hydration, it's a location, it's a destination now. But once you get to hydration, did you actually need to take 8 cups to get there? Like there are other ways to also get your hydration in. So just tracking the 8 cups of water and then beating yourself up when you only got to 7, but like your pee was crystal clear. Like, come on.
Yeah, the goal is to take your color tracker from a very dark orange yellow to a very pale yellow, almost clear. That's the goal we're looking for.
Alrighty, Mark. Number 3. What is your most least used layout?
All right, so this is my favorite ever of all time because it's so iconic. So a few years ago, I decided that I was going to start running. It was over the summer. I was here by myself. At that point, my girls and my wife were on vacation at a beach house, and I still had to be in the office every day. I don't have to do that anymore, so that's why I don't worry about this running tracker anymore. No, it's because every day I was going to fill it out. I was like, okay, Mark, you're going to run, you're going to exercise every day. And I had 2 pens. I had a red pen and a blue pen. And I put my little key. Blue meant that I worked out that day and I ran. Red meant that I didn't. And for the first week, I filled every single one in red. I was like, okay, next week, everyone in red. For the entire month that I tracked this running tracker, Jess, It is a
Oh,
completely red calendar. And this is why I'm a very picky runner. I only run when it's a comfortable temperature for me, so it can't be too hot or too cold. I don't run if it is raining, misting, any type of weather that I don't find to be optimal running weather. And it also turns out that where I live in the summer, it's not that optimal temperature that I prefer, which is in the low 70s. So yeah, it just didn't happen for me. But looking back on this thing now, though, like while running was something that I did do a good amount for whatever reason before I started this damn tracker. It just didn't work out. And there's been a number of workout trackers that I've used, and they're very simple. It's just like a little weight and the days of the week, and I fill it in if I did it. And I just never ever use them, or I would fake it in there to be like, oh gosh, I can't post a picture of this and only not have any of them filled in. Like, yes, you walked around your porch once. But it's so interesting now thinking about that versus I have an entire notebook dedicated to it. But I think it just has to go with it's all about the mindset. It's just one of those things where I probably ran a few times one month and said, hey, let's make a tracker. Let's go ahead and track this because like you're going to do it, and see how that goes. And then never doing it. So never use that one again, ever.
I feel like this is the equivalent of setting up a crocheting tracker because you want to get into crocheting and then you try and realize you hate it.
Yeah, it was inspirational. That's what it was. Sure.
Aspirational rather than realistic. I can completely understand that because I have previously used step trackers, which I do tend to get more than one step a day, so there's usually data to put on there. But yeah, thank you. I'm a saint. But in terms of the scale that I would set up for that, because I'd always do it as a little bar graph, oh no, I never get to the highest number. So I kind of got to the point like, first of all, why are we putting in any of this? Because it's very much demotivating. And secondly, why are you setting it up so that the bar is as long as it is when you know you're going to be kicking down around the low thousands?
I've done the same exact thing because of this plan that I'm doing that I have to track my steps. I think the first week they put like 8,000 steps was my goal. And that entire week I never hit it. And I was just like, I work remote. Like I sit at my desk most days, but I'm working out for 30, 45 minutes, every other day, whatever. They're like, okay, Mark, like just, try to improve it a little bit. And then when I went to the next week, I noticed it was like one day it was like, congratulations, you hit your goal. And I was like, awesome. And it was like 7,500. Like they lowered the goal for me to be able to hit it. And I appreciated that, honestly. But now it's just one of those things where I don't put down a tracker in a graph form for exactly the point you just mentioned. I just write down what the number is at the end of the day. And then I look at it and review it. And I'm like, yeah, Mark, you could do a little bit better. But I think it's the same thing with the social media tracker, right? It's just like, oh yeah, like this is going to go really well. Like I'm going to do this. And you're like, 20,000 steps is the highest point you can get a day. And like maybe marathon runners or other people, if you go to Disney, you're getting 20,000 steps. But I think the average Joe maybe is getting 8,000 or so. Like I would max it at 10, I feel like, and be really happy if I got to like 5.
Yeah, well, we're halfway through the day. Like, it's about 1:30 when we're recording this, my time, not Mark's time.
No.
I have got 900 steps today, so... But that's it. I work from home, so I don't have to commute to anywhere. I work at a desk, so there's not a lot of walking around. I got 917 steps from walking back and forth to the printer today, so... Yeah, leaves a bit to be desired, and especially when you're setting up a tracker where it's like up to 10k steps and then you're barely breaking 1,000 each day. It's super demotivating. So yeah, no.
I don't even know. You should talk to somebody and be like, for someone who's remote, completely stationary and sedentary, what is a good goal for me? They'll be like, Jess, please just stand up every 30 minutes. Like that's good enough for us.
Yes, please stand up. Yeah, kind of.
Roll around on your chair a little bit. Just do this.
Yep, chair yoga. I know chair yoga is a thing. I have not investigated it. But I do also recognize that getting 1,000 steps only actually takes 10 minutes. But it's this like mental block, I feel like. That just feels like too much effort. I'm like, you could just do laps in your kitchen for 10 minutes. I'm not going to, though.
That's when people are like, oh, walk up and down your steps 30 times. I'm like, there's nothing fun about doing that at all. It's different. When I was at work and I would go into the office, we had a pond that had like, I think it was like a quarter of a mile around it. It felt like 2 miles long, but it was only a quarter of a mile. But that would be something that I would try to do often. But it was fun. It was like you were walking around with somebody, you were talking about work, and you were, avoiding the geese and looking at the deer that were in the woods or whatever. And you just did that a few times. And I was like, oh, look at me go. But there's nothing really fun to do, and I need extra entertainment while I'm doing an activity to really get me motivated about it. So yeah, I get you on that. No one's doing those things. I'm not doing those things. Let's say no one. There are people who are very good people. That's not me.
Let us know. Who are you? Why are you doing this? No, I'm kidding. But yeah, I'm exactly the same. I need some kind of entertainment or something to like distract me from the fact that I'm working out. That's why I couldn't do yoga. I tried yoga. I set up a kind of like workout tracker of some description where I would color in each box with what type of workout I'd done or like what type of exercise I partook in. And there was one day that I did yoga and I thought to myself, yeah, never again, because this was so flippin' boring. Because you have to focus on what they're talking about. You have to listen to the instructions, otherwise you're going to stretch wrong and like break your back or something. Yeah. I don't know. Whereas I would rather just be able to walk on the elliptical and watch Gossip Girl. That sounds way more appealing.
Yeah, or just sit on the couch and watch Gossip Girl.
Also an option. I like that one too. I also just love how many of our most failed layouts are like health and exercise related. Oh no.
Hey, I'm trying to be better about it, but I also have to worry about my heart health and not have a heart attack in my mid 40s. So, I just needed a little kick in the ass.
Yeah, no, I've set up a health journal as well. I don't think that mine is quite the same as yours. It doesn't really have like trackers kind of in it, but it does have more like health related research notes and things like that, which I have been enjoying.
All right, Jess, what is your number one worst used, never doing ever again collection page?
See, this one was hard because when I was trying to think about the layouts, so many different ones came to mind, but they all came back to the fact that whenever I set them up, I didn't go in with a clear intention. I didn't kind of, section things out properly and give things like appropriate headers and stuff like that. One example, for instance, is that at the start of this year, I set up a 5x5 bingo board, but never specified what was going to go on the bingo board, so it didn't get used. Eventually, I decided, I'm going to record like my dates out with Vogel, but that, didn't really work. We took more than 2 dates, but I think I only filled 2 in. But if I don't go into a layout knowing very specifically what it's going to be used for and actually scaffolding it out properly so that it can fit that use, it does not get used. Another example would be like a page that I set up, my starter journal set up to say like, this is what we're going to do in reset week. Like this is going to be the page that's dedicated to planning out reset week and planning out your next journal setup or whatever. But I never went and actually put things in for like, capturing specific types of information or any kind of scaffolding. It was literally a blank page with a title and thus did not get used.
You make a really good point. I think this is probably the moral of the entire episode, is that these have to have an actual intention. I think most of them have an intention, but it has to be something that you kind of want to do, right? To like actually want to follow through on it, have some type of motivation. Yeah, I definitely can understand what you're saying here, but I don't even know how you could create a spread or an idea without an idea. I don't know how that works.
I'm obviously a wizard because I've managed it multiple times.
You're like, here's a bingo card board. I'm thinking to myself, you're like, for the dates. I'm like, are you like pre-filling like different places you want to go, or are you just adding them on? It's a make your own bingo board, but you can never win.
I know, right? See, that would have been smart. I ended up really just using it as a place to kind of capture information rather than like a kind of challenge, I suppose. And I never went and actually decided how I wanted to use it. Because one idea was, I'm going to use this to capture like the top 25 things from my 101 things list, and I'm going to put that in there. But I didn't do it because I never actually set it up with that in mind.
Oh, it makes total sense. You create a page with nothing that you want to do with it, but nothing happens to it.
Yeah, look at this beautiful layout with 2 columns for something.
I'll come up with the idea later.
But see, the thing is, the number of times I do that, though, the number of times I scaffold out a page like, this is like the general idea. Like, in general, it's going to be a reflection space, but I don't specify what I'm reflecting on, so then I don't reflect on anything.
I think that's really the big thing about all of these is that you have to know exactly what you're trying to do with it. And you have to think about it. I've been recently with some of my bullet journal setup videos, been thinking about getting back into the plan with me's, but taking your advice and coupling them together instead of just one-offs. But I always plan out my pages regardless of if I'm recording it or not, just because I can't go into a page without an idea of what I'm doing. One, because I'll make a huge mistake with a pen or a marker or miscount or do whatever. Hell, I do that even when I pencil in my pages. But a lot of the times I just think about, especially with trackers, when we talk about what's the number, what's the increments that we're doing with that, I have to do the math before I start doing anything, or else it's just going to become a mess. And especially with like any type of data visualization, like I love data viz. I think it's amazing. As a designer, spent plenty of time visualizing data. But that's one of the reasons I love bullet journaling so much and tracking some things, is just because it is fun to visualize that. But you do have to think about, what does that look like? You know, if it's something that is manageable, am I doing it in the tens, the hundreds, the thousands, whatever that might be, being realistic about it, pushing yourself, especially if it is something that you can actually control. That's a big thing that I've learned as well, especially with like the Instagram trackers, is that I can't fully control how many new followers I get. I can do everything the Instagram gods are asking of me, and that doesn't guarantee it. Versus something like a weight tracker or an exercise tracker or something like that. Like I can control how many reps I do with how much weight if I wanted to push myself on it. I'm not tracking anything like that right now, but I think that makes a really big difference in it as well. But that's just a part of planning. So no wonder the not knowing what you're doing with the page because it doesn't have a label didn't work out. Because yeah, your brain's like, I'm not connecting. This does not compute.
This does not compute. Yeah. And I try and avoid it, but yet it still seems to creep back into my setups one way or another. Usually it's because I need like a page filler. Usually it's just like, oh, I need to set something up here. And I have a vague enough idea about what I want to do with it that I set it up in a certain structure, but I don't fully flesh out the idea. So I don't go in and like label things appropriately and that kind of stuff. So it's very much what you said, is like putting in the forethought, making sure that you kind of know the intentions for a page, knowing how it's going to be used, what kind of data it's going to be capturing or information or whatnot. You know, picking your axes labels appropriately so that you don't have a scale that doesn't make sense for the stuff that you're going to be capturing there, and stuff that you're going to be capturing in a way that isn't demotivating. Like all of these kind of little pieces that you can think about before you put pen to paper, which can be very useful. And sometimes we don't put in that forethought and we end up setting up things that they're just not really going to work for the way that we like to plan.
Womp womp. And you just accept it as a fail. You go ahead and reflect on it, and you never do it again.
Put it to bed. But we'd love to know, though, what kind of layouts, trackers, logs, whatever else, what kind of things have you been setting up in your journals and planners? Maybe a couple of times, maybe only once, and it just doesn't work out. You could be like us, setting it up a couple of times and realizing maybe we need to put this one to bed, or it could have been like a one and done, set it up once, absolutely never again. Let us know either in the comments, or you can email us at plannerpalspodcast@gmail.com.
Absolutely. Well, our next episode, Jess, we're going to do a really fun one. I've been looking forward to this one probably since we started, because we were planning on all these cool ideas. We're going to do a community Q&A episode. So we have to rely on you, our planner pals, to come up with questions that you're curious about. They could be about planning. They could be about previous episodes or things that we've talked about. They could be completely off the wall random questions. Let us know. We're going to compile all of those, and we're going to have a fantastic episode of answering those. There are a few ways that you can get in touch with us to ask these questions. You could email us, plannerpalspodcast@gmail.com. You could also drop a comment in this video or on the podcast as well after you leave your other one about your most failed ones. We'll filter them out, don't worry. Or if you want, we are also going to put Q&As up on our social medias as well. So you can check that out at Planner Pals Podcast on Instagram. We'll also put them in the community feed for you as well. Just ask the question, we'll collect them, and then we'll answer them in our next episode, which I'm very much looking forward to.
I'm interested to see what people want to know, either about like, differences in points of view between us about things, or about like the planner community in general. It's always like a very big can of worms that you can open with these kind of things. So I'm trusting you, Planner Pals. Don't lead us astray on this one. But for today, thank you for watching.